how are people being trampled because of the system that we've set up that maybe I benefit from in such a way that I don't even notice that other people are struggling.
When we start getting into systems or America is intrinsically racist, right? And then, because the question is going to be, well, show me some racist laws. You know what I mean?
You know what I mean? Like, there's this immediate defensiveness instead of sitting back and saying,
yeah, bro, some of this stuff's been hijacked. Like, you can't say punctuality is white supremacy.
Right.
You can't say work ethic is white supremacy.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Ruslan.
We are here today with Ed Usinski. He holds a PhD in American Culture Studies. I think I said that right.
Yeah.
And he is the author of Untangling Critical Theory, brand new book. I had the pleasure of getting an advanced copy of this at Exiles in Babylon conference.
Yeah.
Preston Sprinkle, shout out to him.
Yeah.
And so I had a chance to kind of go through some of this, watched a couple of your other interviews, and you're basically trying to detangle some of the chaos and the some straw manning, some legitimate concern around critical race theory, which some would argue has kind of evolved into the DEI movement and all that sort of stuff. So before we get into critical race theory, could you just kind of give us a background of who you are for folks that don't know, maybe a little bit about your story?
Yeah. Man, I grew up on the west side of Cleveland. That's still where all my family's at. And grew up in a very mixed race environment, kind of at an intersection of white folks, black folks, and Puerto Ricans. We're all up in this area where I grew up. And I was a basketball player.
Okay.
So that wound up kind of putting me in on the other side of the tracks just as far as race went. Ended up spending a lot of my time really on all sides of town. Like, we had 4 very different sides of town where I grew up that had different socioeconomic realities, different racial realities. And I just wound up finding myself all over the place.
Okay.
So my own personal background just made race a reality for me right away, you know, which is interesting even in being out here. And I have these conversations with my friends on the coast all the time, like where there's already a huge amount of diversity. Like back in Ohio, it still is very segregated in most places. I mean, even today, right? So you don't experience that in quite the same way when you're in the city. But where I grew up, it was still very much that way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I grew up originally in Baku, which was a Soviet, under communism. Azerbaijan, Baku was the country. And then when I came to San Diego, Normal Heights, City Heights area, very mixed community. We were the only, as us and another Armenian family in our little apartment complex. And everyone else was black and Hispanic, predominantly black. And so I've always grown up around different folks in different communities. And then when I moved to North County, it was very different in that it was my first time that I was in, I guess what you would call like predominantly white spaces, even though it was also diverse, but it was more upper class, upper middle class, I would say. And then, but I was still here in Vista, which Vista Oceanside is kind of like more blue collar towns. And so, yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about some of these issues regarding race and racism and everything that's happened post, I would say 2016, but really at the peak of 2020. Give us a framework, before we get into critical race theory, give me a framework of what is critical theory and how it comes, and how critical race theory comes out of it. Because I also think that there's a lot there that people kind of gloss over and they go right into critical race theory. But what is critical theory?
Yeah, good. Well, let me say this real quick too, Ruslan. Like, I didn't become a Christian until I was in college.
Okay.
So I didn't really, even though I was growing up in this kind of wildly mixed racial background, I didn't really think much about it.
Okay.
It didn't become an issue for me until I became a Christian.
Okay.
And my assumption was that the community of God was going to have transcended all the racial chaos.
Same.
You know, again, somewhat naively, I guess. And the whole Christian evangelical subculture was brand new to me. Like, so I didn't really know anything about the history of it or anything. Like, I came into Jesus very naively in some sense as far as Christian culture goes. So the whole, how do Christians deal with race suddenly became an issue for me, and became a problem for me that I did not know existed. Okay, so that's even how I got on this track of just paying attention to how should we respond to race and racial tension and racial history, racial intelligence, just, you know, everything that goes along with that within the church in particular. So critical theory is sort of an advanced form, and I get myself in trouble sometimes with people, man, who are listening closely to this stuff. Like, because it came from Marxist thinking, okay? It kind of came out of Marxism. And yet these dudes would not have considered themselves Marxists, because what they were doing is they looked around at society in the early 1900s, saw that there was ripe conditions for a economic revolution to happen the way Marx had predicted it would. And then when it didn't, when instead you got tyranny and you got wild oppression and you got gulags.
Thanks to Marx.
Yeah, right on. In the name of Marxism, right? Call it whatever you want. It was in the name of that philosophy. Yeah. These dudes looked around and said, okay, there's not going to be an economic overhaul.
Yeah.
Why is it, though, that people will still allow themselves to be oppressed? Like they just started doing a study of an oppression, basically. And had, again, like one of the most oppressive times in the history of humanity to study. And they still were very economically minded. Like they still thought that capitalism played a significant role in why people would sign up to allow themselves to be oppressed. But they just expanded it way beyond economics and started looking at all the cultural raw material that allowed people to continue to be kind of kept in check. Why would they not... Why would there not be revolution where people actually got themselves free from oppressors? Why do they not do that? I mean, that's largely what they were studying. And they looked, and this is what was interesting for me, even in my, like you mentioned, my PhD work, was studying really pop culture. Like how does the world of entertainment and advertising and education and the news and what gets considered news and how it gets packaged, like how do all these things combine together to keep people on a certain path that they will willingly go along with and not try to get off of? So
yeah,
that's what they were doing.
The psyop is real, huh?
Yeah, for sure. Looking through that lens, it is for sure.
So it seems like a lot of the critical theorists became highly nihilistic towards the end.
Big time, yeah.
And some of them started dabbling in some weird stuff around kids and pedophilia, and it just got real weird. That was, I'm thinking, like 70s.
Yeah.
So, like, well, I hear you addressing their issues about society and all that kind of stuff, which I think obviously 1900s there were real things going on, right? But it seems like in an attempt to deconstruct everything, they deconstructed everything,
left with nothing,
and they were left with nothing.
Yeah.
And then what are you left with? You're left with nihilism and perversion, like overt perversion that some of these folks were into, and that in parts of France, and they were like advocating for just really weird stuff with kids and that kind of stuff.
Man, they wanted to. This is the easiest way to describe it. I feel like they were trying to erase all the lines, like wherever a line had been laid down and called normal, or wherever there was a line that. That somebody who has power, I guess that's another thing that I didn't say yet. Like they studied power and the way power works. And there's very binary in some respects, that there's those who have power and then there's everybody else. Okay. And they're doing all this from a godless framework. There is no God that's going to come in and intervene in any kind of way. There's no morality outside the system that we appeal to. And so everything just becomes a power game. So like you said, you either wind up in nihilism, you wind up doing some really perverse stuff, again, as measured against a standard of morality, or you just become a new oppressor yourself, like we just talked about, right? You just become the very thing that you hate. When you have power, you're not so much looking out for people anymore. You just take power and do what people have always done with power, unless it's kept in check.
Tell me what you think about this. Like I was teasing out this thought, and I think that power is what it is. There's always going to be hierarchies. There's always going to be power. There's always going to be power vacuums. And when you deconstruct power, something else is just going to fill that void. And oftentimes we think that you take away power from these people and then we'll get a utopia. And it's never been that way. You take away power and it gets worse. And it gets worse and it gets worse.
Yeah.
Right? So it seems from modern history, at least, post-Marx, and what you saw in the Soviet Union and all these sorts of things. And so it's like, I almost feel like power is inevitable. There will be hierarchies. There will be people who, for whatever reason, attain power.
Yeah.
And then my heart isn't power's bad, power structures are bad. To me, it's like these are the realities. They've always been the realities.
Yeah.
And Christians being faithful and allowing power to serve truth seems like a better anecdote than let's deconstruct power hierarchies, right? Like meaning men and women of God not seeking power, but seeking to be effective and faithful stewards.
Yeah.
And then if power comes as a byproduct of that, and by power I don't mean like the leader of the free world necessarily, because I think that's a crazy thing to aspire for. I mean power in the sense of influence.
Okay.
I mean power in the sense of moving culture forward. I mean power in the sense of being in the marketplace, doing good work, and helping people, paying people a reasonable wage, taking care of people.
Okay.
If you're taking care of employees, treating them better than the world would treat them. If you have means, caring for the least of these, the way Jesus instructed us to, right?
Okay.
Like I feel like the solution to so much of this is a better equipping of Christians to do the work instead of deconstructing all the hierarchies in the world that are there anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we deconstruct them and we flee the institutions and we flee the hierarchies and we flee the systems, who's gonna fill those voids? People who don't have any God in their worldview.
Yeah, right on. And again, you and I, like, we haven't had any conversations except for what we did at Exiles, but I think we're on the same page with that, right? It's like, I think there's some usefulness, though, to be mindful of how power works within systems and within structures, which I think most, again, I'm speaking in generalities, man. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to work within the church. I've been in parachurch ministry for over 30 years, over 35
FCA,
years.
right? That's your background?
Athletes in Action.
Athletes in Action.
I do have some FCA, but Athletes
sure.
in Action.
Yeah.
And working with athletes, obviously. And so, like, I know the predominantly white evangelical subculture of Christianity. That's what I've been a part of. And so my concerns, and I think we just need to say this because I'm not trying to be an expert in critical theory. I'm not trying to be an expert or a proponent of Marxism. Like, again, I even want to make sure you know that. What I want Christians to do is not just so easily dismiss some of the observations that come out of those frameworks. Since everybody wants to start throwing that language around in the last 5, 6, 7 years, if we're going to throw it around, then let's slow down instead of just summarily dismissing it. Man, let's see, are there some observations that I think are worth us looking at and thinking through a theological grid to say, how should we then live in light of this observation, in light of the way power is being misused? What should we do as Christians to correct that? And I agree with you. Like, I don't personally think, well, my goal then should be to try to tear down all the systems or to try to overthrow, a particular political party or whatever. Like, I'm not into that at all. But on my watch and my sphere of influence, how can I use the resources I have to make sure that people are being taken care of well? How can I pay attention and actually be sensitized to injustice and to words like oppression? Like, how are people being trampled because of the system that we've set up that maybe I benefit from in such a way that I don't even notice that other people are struggling? Like, I think I need to become more aware of that. I think we need to become more aware of that.
Okay.
As the shoes fit. Again, I say we, there's plenty of people that do that.
Sure.
Within, again, white evangelicalism, there are people that do that.
Yeah.
But my experience has been largely in all the different churches I've been a part of, and again, being in these huge movements of evangelicalism across decades, we tend to find a way to not have to think about or deal with those types of issues.
Okay. Well, let's come back to those issues. You said justice and oppression, because I'm really curious, because I think words really mean things.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of words have been hijacked.
Agree.
Okay. So I was with a friend of mine who you are familiar with, and we were having a conversation, and climate justice came up.
Okay.
And he said, I'm for climate justice.
Yeah.
And I said, do you know the United States puts out 15% of the world's emissions? I said, if we move to an all-green system as the Green New Deal proposes, we don't make a dent in what comes out globally. And you know who suffers? The developing nations right now.
Yeah.
So this notion you've been sold of climate justice and ban fracking and all, and this is, as someone, I got a Tesla outside, I got solar panels, I got Tesla battery walls. I'm as green as you can. I literally don't have a carbon footprint because of all the stuff that we do. But that's strictly pragmatic. I like not having an electricity bill because I use a lot of electricity, and we sell it back to the grid and make money that way as well.
Okay.
So that's a word that's been hijacked. We take justice, which is a biblical concept, and then we sandwich it with just complete poisonous ideology around climate justice that's actually more damaging to the people that you claim are being negatively affected by the climate change. And I'm not one of those climate change deniers or global warming doesn't exist. I think that there is evidence that the world's getting warmer. But that's a word that like can trigger a lot of people because we're seeing it in real time. And this is a dear brother in the Lord. And me just giving him a couple of points, of like, hey, you know this bill of goods you've been sold about climate justice? You know that's nonsense, right? You know that almost none of this is going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is innovation and technology and developing nations getting the access to green things. But then you get into the, well, what is it causing the coal mines to source out these EV batteries and to source out our iPhones? And who's actually... So then what are we talking about? Dirty fuel or slaves pulling out batteries that are going to help us feel green because I drive a Tesla and an EV, but how did that get ethically sourced? You know what I mean?
Totally, man.
So it's like, but that's the word that's used. Justice.
So stuff gets hijacked. I like how you said that. And what I feel like I've been trying to do, again, in my own conversations is it gets hijacked. And so then we just dismiss the conversation altogether. Okay, and say, again, it's this binary way of thinking that it's either this or this. And you just said life is way more complicated. These situations are way more complicated. I'll say this to myself. I've tried to stop talking about things that I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, seriously. I mean, we get so much information coming from so many different sources. And I like to think, and I have these conversations with people, like, everything's being mediated to me. As far as the information that we have about what's going on out there in the world. So I at least need to slow down and be a little more suspicious. And again, that's, I think, a positive thing that comes out of the whole critical theory world is, now again, they take suspicion to the place of nihilism, okay, to where there's nothing left. You can't trust anything anywhere ever. And I'm not going there, but I think I need to stop being as naive and thinking that it's either this group or this group has the answer. Like, I need to slow down and actually become a better thinker. If I want to be involved in these conversations, like, it's going to be way more complex. That's true racially. It's true with any of these things, right? It's more complex. But I don't want to let the conversation be hijacked. I think I want to keep saying that too. I don't have to let the conversation be hijacked. So just because somebody takes that word and does that with it, it's like, I'm not going there. Like, I don't have to go there with you.
Fair enough. Okay, so tell me, what is critical theory? Critical race theory. What influence did critical theory play into critical race theory? And then we can talk about all the straw manning, because I agree that it's been straw man quite a lot. And we can kind of get into the particulars and partly what inspired your book. So what is critical race theory? What did it come out of? What was it initially? What was it trying to do? And now how has it been straw man by the right and some folks on the right, some dear brothers and sisters in the Lord on the right. And what's the value in it?
So what's interesting is, even as we're speaking right now, like, we're almost kind of past now the trendiness of this idea of critical race theory. Like, let's just admit that. And I knew this was going to happen, that it was going to pop up for a couple of years, catch a lot of fire, a lot of smoke is going to circulate, and then it's going to pass like everything else does in Christianity. But I still think that what these dudes were doing 40 years ago actually still can be valuable to us in the church because of the questions that it raises. Okay? So let me just say that as sort of a preface. And I'm not saying that to defend critical race theory, or I'm coming in here saying we need more critical race theory. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the questions that these people raised are still relevant to us, especially in the church. Okay. So when all the civil rights stuff happened in the 60s, right? There were laws passed saying you can't do the Jim Crow stuff anymore. You can't have overt racism anymore legally. And so there's literally, since the 60s, there's been this desire for us to be post-racial, even though that language was not being used until Obama. Like, folks wanted to think we're good now. We're done with this race stuff. We don't need to talk about this anymore. And critical theorists were all about criticizing and thinking deeply about culture and what was going on in culture, but they didn't want to look through a racial lens. People that were doing more sociological racial study didn't want to think critically enough about what was going on with capitalism and what was going on with ongoing discrimination. Like, they just weren't doing a good job with that. So there were a group of academics who were working in law. And again, most people know this now. It's been floating around for a little bit. They were working specifically in the context of law. And they were saying, what is it about the way law works that allows discrimination to continue to have as much power now in the 80s and early 90s as it had 50 years ago? Like, how is that possible? That we're still coming with these same kinds of outcomes, and it feels like nothing's changed. Everything has changed and nothing's changed. And so they started to theorize about that and came up with ideas to say, okay, there's a particular narrative that's floating around that says race isn't a problem anymore. We're going to flip that around and we're going to put race in your face. And we're going to just reestablish that race is still a problem. In fact, we'll say race is endemic to society. It's hardwired and woven into the fabric of society. Now, let's look through that lens and see what we see. Instead of acting like race is never here anymore, we're going to see race everywhere, things like that. And there were a whole bunch of tenets and ideas and concepts and hypotheses that they came up with about why things were still operating the way that they were. How could you have racism without overt racists? Right? How could just the way the structures and the systems have been set up, the patterns and the policies, the procedures, the way that we've learned to do life with each other, how does it still kind of endorse and maintain a racist way of doing life? Yeah. That's what they were doing 40 years ago.
And is this connected to some of the policies we saw from the war on drugs and what was happening in terms of the mass incarceration rates?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so it started in law. It started getting applied like widely throughout culture, all the different social lanes. People started asking, some people started asking, what is the racial component to this? And how is it that, this is interesting, man. I've been saying this a lot lately too. It's like for hundreds of years, white folks, of which I am one, had no problem understanding what it meant to be white. They had no problem understanding that there was a separation in society that they were very committed to maintaining. And they knew that whiteness was at the top of things and everybody else was underneath racially, okay? And then we get to the 60s. Well, and that whole time, like non-white people are like, can we just be human? Like, will you just treat us as humans, right? You got the James Baldwins and you just very poetic ways of saying, could you just let me be a man? Let me be a woman. And let me be part of this thing with you. And folks had no problem saying no. Clearly, cleanly, and clearly, no. Then some laws passed in the 60s. And there's other stuff that happened too. Again, I'm not going to try to oversimplify it. But there were significant civil rights laws that were passed in the 60s. And it was like, we're good. And now we don't do race anymore. As white folks, we don't want to talk about race anymore. We're past that now. Meanwhile, again, the ship has been set in motion across centuries, man, and it is baked into the system. And there are consequences. There are family dynamics that have been significantly altered because of racism. There are, again, housing and education and prison and just, all throughout the economic system. Racism has been hardwired into everything that we've done. It didn't just disappear and evaporate all of a sudden. So that was just such a naive take.
Yeah, could you give me some like practical examples? Because that's where people are going to go to. It's like, okay, cool. When we start getting into systems or America is intrinsically racist, right? And then, because the question is going to be, well, show me some racist laws. You know what I mean?
So even saying that it's intrinsically racist, I think it's.
I'm not saying I'm saying that is usually what people say. You're saying that America is racist to its core and its bones, to the fact where it's so corrupt in the systems and institutions that even when we pass laws and civil rights, that the critical race theory perspective is that racism persisted for generations after.
Yeah, and just being racialized like Christian Smith and Michael Emerson in that Divided by Faith book, early 2000s. Man, they did a sociological study specific to the church, asking these very types of questions. Is race still a problem within the church? And one of their conclusions was that we've been racialized.
Okay.
And what did they mean by that? Well, it's like, again, every component of society has been infected. Let's say it like that. Has been infected by seeing skin color as having value to it. Okay? it's been infected with this idea that
did you say
skin color
infected?
infected.
Like a disease?
That it has, again, mentally, that sociologically, the way we think about skin color, it has value. Skin color has different values associated with it. You're hesitating on that. What are you thinking?
Yeah, because I think today, like, because I'm a very like practical, pragmatic type of person.
Yeah.
Who are the highest income earners in America today? Is it white folks?
Entertainers and
No. By race.
I don't know.
Indians.
Okay.
So if we're talking darker skin bad, whiter skin better,
Yeah.
you have Indians. You have different pockets where Nigerians and folks from the Caribbean tend to outperform white folks.
Yeah.
Economically. So if everything is race, and we're not looking at the nuances of some perhaps social engineering, perhaps the byproduct of mass incarceration in the 80s, which my father-in-law and my mother-in-law were a part of and went to jail for a long time.
Okay.
And everything is just this external race aspect. Well, it's like some of the highest income earners per race are not white.
Yeah.
Not in America, right? So, and again, if we're talking capitalism, I'm looking at it from a very pragmatic, practical lens. Now, we can talk about exceptionalism of those immigrants that are coming over and they're going to be smarter. But the reality is like, hey, man, folks who aren't white perform better in America and actually control more wealth and income than white folks.
Okay. Just go back to where I started, though. Race has meaning. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that.
Well, you said infected. That's different than meaning.
I'm saying that there's a, okay, let me say this again. This isn't the first time that this has come up. I also think this looks different in different parts of the country.
Sure.
In different cities.
Sure.
In rural,
yes.
Depending on where you're at.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in Southern California for context.
I know.
So it's totally different out here.
I know.
So there's like the white folks that I know have grown up with folks of different ethnicities.
Diversity, yeah.
And interracial marriage is very common here. Almost, I'd say 70% of my friends are in interracial marriages. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's very, it's different here. So to be fair to you, it is different in Southern California.
It's different. And I said that at the beginning too. Like it's, well, just so I don't lose this. That's where it started in the 70s and 80s when these guys were writing. It definitely was still, there was still an infection that really hadn't been confronted.
Fair.
Okay? That skin color had meaning and was still creating huge roadblocks to being able to move forward. Now, yeah, man, over the course of the last 40 years, and again, look, if you're still feeling oppressed, if you are still living under the effects of redlining, and you're still living under the effects of things that have happened to your parents, okay, that were unfair, or your grandparents, like nothing's changed. Is what the way you feel. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you're surrounded with people that are still living in poverty and are able to look at all these other reasons why that come from history, you don't feel like much has changed. Now we can say to them, look, you can still make some choices in the midst of that and get up out of that. For sure you can. But it does not then remove the fact that there was this thing set in motion that was based on race that had very negative consequences. So now, do I need to be fully responsible for that in 2024? Again, this is where this goes, right? That right away, the mindset is to try to justify or to try to get out from under having any obligation to do anything about it. Like that's what I feel like I run into all the time.
From Christians?
Yeah, from Christians, which is all I'm concerned about.
Sure.
Again, because it is a different conversation.
Sure.
Once you go broader and you go outside the church.
Sure.
It's complicated enough just inside the church.
Yes. I think that's fair, and I think what the response from, I can't speak for Christians, I think the recent pushback has been less about what Delgado was doing in the 80s, has been more about the Robin DiAngelos and the Kimdys and the poison they're saying now. And you might be fond of these folks, or I don't know where you stand. But the Kimdy, very, very, very specifically, the only way to fix past discrimination is recurrent discrimination and future discrimination. That is poison.
Yeah.
That is awful. That's antithetical to the gospel. And there's Christians that are working with him. I'm not going to say their names right now, but that are okay with him and are like, oh, you don't get it. We're more sophisticated and academics, right? That it's like it's a lot of head knowledge. But how does this practically flesh out? Are you loving your neighbor? Are you actually doing anything for other people? I'm not saying they aren't, but I'm saying that's one. D'Angelo, who is the white fragility and just assuming that all white people Because
Or
this
a
is the
certain
issue.
kind of way.
Yeah, but because this is the issue. You get into hyper-generalizations, which are not helpful, and you get into the appeal to motive fallacy because you didn't think that all white people are implicitly biased and all white people are other and all white people can't detangle their colonizer roots and all white. And I've had stuff like this said to me. Now, mind you, I'm Armenian, right? 109 years ago, there was an Armenian genocide. Like, there's deep oppression against my people.
Yep.
My mother is adopted by adopted by an Armenian family, Ukrainian or Russian, her DNA, we don't quite know. So, like, because I passed for white, I had this stuff said to me, and I'm like, first of all, like, there is no colonization in my blood. There's none of that. There's no slavery in my blood. I was literally on another continent, and my people were the folks who were oppressed, like literally oppressed, and a genocide was committed against. So, but this is the danger of like the D'Angelo white fragility. All white people are like this, and the white power structures, and it's like, yeah, no, I don't think all white people are like that. I have no problem with saying I'm white, but I think because of social construct. What does white even mean? There's Armenians that look white. There's albino black folks that can pass as white. You know what I mean? Mariah Carey. Like, I didn't know Mariah Carey was black until like 7 years after she was a megastar, right? You see how kind of wonky this gets into the practical. And so I think that's the pushback that I hear is not, are there racist people out there? Of course there's racist people out there, and they should be condemned, and that's bad. And there's a resurgence of that we could talk about, that's online, that's prevalent, that's really dark. But I think the issue people are getting is like, fam, you can't hyper-generalize all white folks as implicitly biased against people of color. That's craziness.
You can't do that. Again, so I don't have to ride that all the way to the end of the tracks. Sure. Like some people will say you have. I don't feel like I have to. What I can do though, and again, Ruslan, this is what it comes down to for me, man. And I love talking about this stuff. Obviously, I wrote a book about it. Again, the book is not to try to justify the extremes or to justify some of the craziness that people are pushing back on. The book, and really what I want to be about is, I live amongst mostly white evangelicals that don't pay any attention to things that black, and again, I've spent most of my time with black folks. So again, it's other minorities too, right? I'm not just trying to limit it there, but my experiences with mostly black folks. What black brothers and sisters have been asking for across the decades that I've been a part of Christianity, and the more that I've studied and just read over across the last century, is what inclusion looks like within the church. When are you going to, one, just like start to confront your ethnic indifference and actually care about the issues that I care about? It's very interesting that there are certain passages that get highlighted within white evangelicalism, and there's certain theological constructs that sort of guide the way that we think about what counts as ministry and what counts as being on mission, that just coincidentally it leaves out concerns that black folks have had. It does. And why is it that we still have so many spaces these days where, again, the patterns and the policies and the procedures that we've sort of put in place haven't maintained or allowed us to continue to look the same way we looked 40 years ago racially? It's not, hear me say, because I don't like this either. Well, it's because everybody's racist. No, like that's too simplistic, and that's not true. At least not in the way that you mean that. There's things that have been set in motion, maybe that people aren't even thinking about the way we've always done things that has always left people out that we just don't recognize. And again, it's going to look different in Dayton, Ohio than it maybe looks in LA. But slow down and think about it and see if the shoes fit, put them on.
Can you give me some practical examples?
Again, I'm living them. There's one that I talk about in the book that I just think is ripe. Still ripe. I've had lots of exposure to different Christian schools. There's like 4 or 5 of them that I think of all the time. One in particular, a lot of Christian schools started in the 70s because they didn't want desegregation to happen. They wanted their kids, like, literally to not have to go to school with kids from the city.
Bob Jones University.
Come on. Again, that's an extreme. Yes. Where I live and where I'm talking about is not even Bob Jones extremism. It's just straight up one of our reasons, not the only one, but one of our reasons is we don't want to be with those kids. We don't want our kids going to school with those kids, city kids. They're dangerous. They're this, which becomes white-black right away. Not exclusively, because there's some white kids we don't want our kids going to school with either, but it's got a racial component to it. So you set yourself up in a certain way in the 70s that excludes those kids from being able to come to this school. Even if it's not like overtly written in. Again, this is how law works. We'll just make it so that we know that financially, we know that where we go to recruit, we know that, what we put on our brochures or whatever, it's going to attract a certain kind of kid, and we're going to make it very difficult for kids we don't want here to be here.
You're talking about college in
I'm
particular.
talking about school.
Just school in general.
School in general.
Okay.
Though I do think this also definitely applies to college.
Okay.
I've got K through 12 in mind. Okay. And so I've had this conversation with somebody that was there when this was going on. Okay. Was old enough to have been there. Now, 40 years have passed, 50 years in some cases now. And we still have a predominantly white population at the school. You always got a few black kids mixed in, or a couple kids from exchange students or whatever from overseas, but it's still a predominantly white population.
And you're talking about like a private school?
Yeah,
or
Private Christian school.
Private Christian school.
Private Christian school.
Gotcha.
Okay,
And is it paid?
Yeah,
It's paid. Okay, got it.
yeah. Your teaching staff is entirely white except for maybe one. Okay. Now, here's just the question. And you're surrounded. This is the other thing. You've been surrounded. The school maybe has moved a couple times, but it has always been in spaces, coincidentally, where there were lots of non-white kids actually around in the neighborhoods.
Okay, so these that's going to be my next question is what is the demographics of these
Totally
schools?
have access to non-white kids to come to the school.
So these are like in white Christian schools in black neighborhoods?
Black neighborhoods are close by.
Okay.
Let's just say that.
Interesting.
They're
Okay.
within distance to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, hear what I'm saying. The conclusion to this is not going to be that everybody's racist. The conclusion for me is why would we think that if it was set in motion in a certain kind of way, unless there was an intervention somewhere along the way, that was going to change the way we went about our business. And I didn't even say the things that we teach, the way we talk about social issues, the theology and theological grid that we look through, how we talk politically in the classroom, like that hasn't changed. So until there's an intervention into some of that, why would, and of course, nobody's racist now. We're not racist. Okay. But we still basically are functioning the same way that we did 50 years ago within the school and the way we're set up. Well, what are you saying? What are you saying about us? Like, you know what I mean? Like there's this immediate defensiveness instead of sitting back and saying, yeah, we do. Is there something in our patterns? And again, these are all P words. I didn't even do this on purpose, but this is what they are.
P words on purpose and patterns.
Right on. Patterns, policies, procedures, the way we operate together. Is there just stuff that we need to look at that maybe without doing it intentionally on our watch, they did it intentionally.
Yes.
On our watch, we just have not done anything to change it.
Okay.
We haven't noticed. We haven't paid attention. Everything is cool.
Yeah, so that would be a thing of omission, a sin of omission.
Yes,
there hasn't been intentionality.
And it would be a reflection of a systemic problem. Okay. So again, everybody loses their mind about systemic racism. It's like, okay, this is a systemic problem at this school. When I look at parachurch organizations that I've been a part of for over 30 years, am I surrounded with a bunch of racist white men and women? I don't believe that at all. But do we have a systemic problem in the way that we go about recruiting people to come to our staff, in the schools that we go to recruit, in the way resources are allocated, in the types of things that we talk about from the stage when we're having our staff trainings? You know what I'm saying? If we're never talking about, even in the 70s, and again, I've been in these conversations a lot lately, Ruslan, with my own people. It's like, if from the beginning of our organization, there was a commitment to not talking about race or racial issues, even in the height of when cities were still burning because of overt racism, you didn't want to talk about it then. We've set ourselves on a course to not be able to think intelligently as Christians about how to deal with race as a construct, as a sin. Like, we just don't talk about it. Or when it comes up, it immediately gets dismissed as just this political thing. It's just race baiting, or it's off mission, or there's always some way to not deal with it. Meanwhile, people that are directly affected by race, like it's not coming to them as just a trending topic or, landing in their inbox because somebody sent an article. No, they're living with racial tension. You're not, but they are. do we not have some obligation as Christians to try to understand that? Again, that doesn't mean I got to go along with every crazy solution that's produced, or even every observation that. And I've been around this. I don't have to go along with everything that gets said about it, but I know that I'm part of a people who have done a really good job of never talking about it at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What are you thinking? I'm poking at stuff.
It's so not my reality.
I know.
Like my wife is black, my kids are mixed, all my friends are, either black or in interracial marriages or white, and they kind of are aware of some of the history, and they've are in tune enough to know that these things are reality, right? And so I think the part that would be like, so there's a natural component where people are going to go into their silos. People are going to go into their own, right?
On. Yeah.
Unless your world is overflowing from a genuine multi-ethnic framework, which again, I'm an immigrant, Armenian, mom's adopted, I look white, I don't look super Armenian. Like my identity has always been shaped that it doesn't fall in neatly into boxes. So for me, these things overflow. So I'll give you the flip side to everything you just said, right?
Okay.
We homeschool our kids.
Okay.
We don't homeschool our kids for racial reasons because I don't want my mixed black son to be around black kids. But we do want to curate their environment very carefully.
Right on.
And we do not want to put them in a public school system for a plethora of reasons. Because, we can rail against abuse in the church. We don't talk about how much abuse happens in the public school system, how you're more likely to be assaulted in the public school system, right? To be abused in the public school system.
Okay.
So we've intentionally created a very curated environment for them where they're homeschooled 2 days a week. My son goes to a group. It's like an enrichment group. We can't call it school, but it's like all your basic stuff.
Okay.
At a church down the street. And then one day he goes for electives at a different church in Encinitas, right?
Okay.
And the Encinitas school is definitely going to be more predominantly white. The local school is fairly diverse. You got Hispanic kids, you got black kids. Like it's pretty diverse.
It sounds like your kid's in a great situation, by the way. Right?
Yeah, and so
that's good.
So we have an environment for him because it's not that like, oh, those poor kids. It's like, no, I don't know what those kids are dealing with at home, and the last thing I need is someone bringing porn to my 9-year-old on a smartphone and showing them stuff he shouldn't see.
Yep,
right.
For sure.
So I think there's that, and I think that the Christian schools have had. I think some of the concern is more of that and less of like, we just don't want that for our kids. Again, I don't know. I'm just saying in my environment, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when I'm examining like my circles and I'm examining who's at these schools, like granted, yes, the school in Encinitas is going to be way different than the school in Vista. My son is black and he's Armenian. He understands slavery and he understands the Armenian genocide.
Okay.
I'm not sending him to Encinitas and wanting him to be aware that he's the only black kid.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think there's any utility to that.
Yeah.
We don't sugarcoat slavery and the atrocities of that, and neither do we sugarcoat what happened to the Armenian people during the Armenian genocide. But sometimes it seems like there becomes this overemphasis of let's talk about how you're other and how you're in a white space. And it's like he's in a Christian space with a bunch of people that love Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes, they're in a different socioeconomic status being in Encinitas than in Vista. But these are not things that like we want him to be aware of. But that was the narrative in 2020. Sit your kids down, tell them about systemic racism. This was like on CNN, videos being created for kids.
Yeah.
And so like, I hear you. I don't mean to be like insensitive. It's just that my selection bias, my world is very different. How much of this do you think is people being people? This is how humans are. They're tribal. And the redemptive work of Jesus should make us less tribal because now the only tribe we're really a part of is the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Right? Versus this is sinful. This is bad. Because even, I think there was a point where there was a big push for like interracial churches and multi-ethnic churches. And then you look at, even where we're at our church, like our church is disproportionately multiracial, but it's still not like an even blend because we're in Oceanside, Vista, California, which is like, still 50% white or something. I want to say it's like 50% white and like 30% Hispanic, or maybe 50% Hispanic, 30% white. So, like, having said that, I just remember there was a time where it was like multi-ethnic, let's have a mosaic, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, well, are we really expecting communities who are predominantly white to have these multiracial churches? And the same thing on the flip side.
Yeah.
Are we expecting black churches to all of a sudden accommodate white people?
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I love the idea of accommodation versus assimilation. Like, I think there's something there in terms of like, how can we make something where everyone feels welcome?
Yeah.
On the flip side, if we're talking something as superficial as music, right? Yeah. I would prefer that we do more gospel songs. I would prefer that we do more Maverick City hybrid songs at my church. But I don't know if that's really even going to move the needle. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And in the same token, if I'm going to a predominantly black church, they're not doing Chris Tomlin and, like Bethel music,
Right.
They're doing what they know, right?
Yep.
And so like how much of this is again, people are tribal, it is what it is, versus this is sinful and bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
when does it become sinful?
Yes.
And again, I don't think there's a formula for it. What I want, I'll just keep saying this even, what I want for the church, what I want for the people that I have influence over is that we would, from a missiological standpoint, so I'll go theological. Mm-hmm. Like I want us to have a missions mentality in our community.
Amen.
Okay? And so what does a good missionary do, man? A good missionary seeks to love and to understand and to connect with the people that are different than him or her.
Amen.
In the space they find themselves in.
Amen.
That's what I want.
Yes.
That's a mentality.
Yes.
And so if my monoculturalism is enveloped in an ideology of supremacy, and I may not even know it until it gets poked. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That we actually, we want to keep it this way. We don't want any of them coming in here. Like, that's not gospel.
That's bad.
Okay,
that's overtly sinful.
And I've been around long enough. So again, people can do whatever they want with this, right? Mm-hmm. Again, we're all kind of coming from our own experiences and what we bumped into along the way. Mm-hmm. I have bumped into that mentality enough once I've dug into it with people to say, oh, this is actually a broader problem than maybe I even wanted to admit to in my 20s.
Okay.
That far too many, and again, I'll speak as a white person about white people. Mm-hmm. Far too many white people, white-skinned people, have been able to get a pass in not having to care about anybody outside their community. Well, we could say that's true for black people too. Okay. White people have been the dominant culture. White people are the ones that kind of set the racist system in motion. Mm-hmm. So again, like, it's not the same thing.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be the same thing. That, I want black people to be doing this same kind of work.
Yeah.
Again, hear me say that. I do. Asian people, Hispanic folks. But I'm starting with white people when they're usually in the dominant culture where I'm at. Again, that may not be as true out here. Where I'm at, I feel like we have a responsibility to take the first step.
Sure.
Even if so again, you're asking me, I'm not going around trying to make everybody be multicultural. There's problems with that too. But it is a mentality, it's a mindset. And I even get into that in the last couple of chapters. Like, do what the best congregations are doing. Like, you don't have to sit around and try to figure out how big a racist you are. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not what's on the table. Mm-hmm. What's on the table is, how do we become more cross-culturally competent? Mm-hmm. How do we start to care about whatever that group is that's closest to us, that's different from us? Mm-hmm. And it may even be just a socioeconomic thing. Maybe it doesn't even start out as a racial thing. Maybe it's a socioeconomic difference. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's an age difference. Like, I'm up for different kinds of differences, but let's just start practicing caring about and moving towards and including people that are different from us.
Sure.
When we have power, I'll use that language again.
Yes.
When we're the ones that are actually in position to make decisions about how we're going to use our time and our resources and what we're going to do on the stage on a Sunday or whenever we meet together, let's make sure that we're removing as many hindrances as we can and opening our arms to as many people as possible. That's just the gospel. Now, again, that's gotten messed up with politics and Ruslan, I wanted to say this. Again, I feel this from my city friends especially. Y'all are living in the midst of hyper-progressive political realities. You are, right? Cities are controlled mostly by Democrats, and these days by sometimes pretty radically progressive Democrats. And so you wind up getting pulled to these extremes with the rhetoric and with the solutions that I don't blame you at all for pushing back against. Not at all.
Yeah, there's definitely been, I would say, as someone that has kind of, I don't want to open the can of worms of politics, but, you know, a centrist more or less, you know, within the last several years, pushed way to the right. Not because the Overton window shifted so far left.
Okay.
You know, and so there's that. So let me bounce this off of you. So I think when we talk about all the complexities and all the ways that people are different, I don't think any group is a monolith. Like black folks aren't a monolith, white folks aren't a monolith, right?
Yeah.
So when we're like, hey, be competent cross-culturally, I'm like, yes and amen.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes, and you tell me what you think about this, when we're talking about, hey, we don't know about those folks, right? We don't know about those folks being in our communities, which sounds very bad on a superficial level.
It does.
But I think of my buddy Shane Smith, stand-up comedian, and he was telling me about like growing up poor, white trailer trash biker gang.
Yeah.
Biker gang, you know, affiliated, the biker gang he was a part of got connected to one of the bigger biker gangs, right?
Okay.
I think when we're seeing these issues, and we talked about the differences between like, hey, like, why is there this proliferation amongst like poor white folks and poor black folks, and it looks the same. It's different in that what's happening in Compton is not going to be the same as what's happening in the Appalachian Mountains, right? But there's similar struggles, different external realities. They look different, but very similar.
Yeah.
And so I think when folks are like, oh man, we don't know about those folks, I don't think they're saying we don't know about X, Y, and Z race. I think what they're saying is like, if the biker gang shows up to your church and they're wearing Hell's Angels gear and they're all white folks, we're going to be looking at them sideways.
For sure.
Who are you?
Right.
What are you up to?
Yep.
Why are you here? Are you guys involved in trafficking? Are you moving dope? What's up?
Right.
Those are reasonable suspicions to have, right? And so I think when people are thinking about this, again, this is why I go like, I don't think there's utility in hyper-generalizing people and assuming that all black folks have the same concerns.
No.
Right? Because folks in impoverished areas are going to have different concerns than folks in middle-class areas. And I think what tends to happen, even within this conversation, and a lot of what's happening on like the rise of overt racism, is people hyper-generalize and they think that like the culture or hip-hop or sexy red or Ice Spice is like indicative of black culture. And it's like, you guys just don't know enough middle-class black people or lower middle-class black people or upper middle-class black people or wealthy black people to assume that it's all like the culture and this is just black people. And it's like, yo, that is such a hyper generalization. But I feel like that's kind of like, you know, so again, like the person that's growing up and their entire world is within a 5-mile radius and they sometimes go without food and their dad or their granddad or their uncles are all locked up. That's a different reality. And I would say that's not the majority. Like that's still they may be more prevalent in black communities, right?
Yeah.
But that tends to be to me, it seems like a socioeconomic byproduct than it is a racial byproduct.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, but this is what's interesting, Ruslan. When you say racial byproduct, meaning that it is 90% the reason why this is happening is because of some kind of racial implication, or it's a high percentage reason why. Because here's what I think even when I hear all that. And again, this is just the way I think. This is the way I've gone through school. It's the way I read books. Race is still a component of that in some kind of way. We can still look through a racial lens just to see what's there. You're saying don't immediately assume that it's this or that.
Yes.
And I very much agree with that. In fact, the biggest problems that I have with guys like Kendi, who you mentioned earlier, is that he at least writes in a way, which is mostly how I've encountered him, as though he's swinging the pendulum hard to this other extreme and making it sound like it's always racist.
It's always about race.
And it's always about race. Now, again, I think that's an overreaction to people saying it's never about race.
Sure.
I really do. So
Sure.
again, how do you confront that? How do you change that?
Sure.
Some people's strategy is we're just going to swing the pendulum all the way to the other extreme.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
And then we look at him and say, well, that's too extreme.
Yeah.
And he says, well, what did you want me to do? Like,
Yeah.
how was I going to get them off? Okay. There's always a racial component, though, that's worth looking at or considering or thinking about. And
Sure.
sometimes it's stronger, sometimes it's lighter. There's always... So, Tyreek Hill just got pulled out of his car. Again, this just happened a couple days ago. I don't know when this is going to drop, but by now
he was headed to a football game.
He was going to the game.
Yep.
Okay, he's speeding, wildly speeding.
Sure.
He gets pulled over. This is on the video cam, right? Again, I guess most people
went viral.
It went crazy, right?
Yeah.
So you see what he did? They tell him to put his window down. He doesn't put his window down, and they go and get aggressive and pull him out of the car. Now, immediately, again, you know this is happening. I always read the comments just to see what people are doing with it. They go to these extremes. This is all racist. This is just not listening to cops, right? Not listening to authority. He's got this past of being a certain kind of way. This is what you do with people who drive nice cars in this area. Again, it's just kind of the rhetoric going back and forth from the extremes. What I want to do as a Christian is be able to look at a situation like that. And again, this is falling on such hard times, the whole both and or bothism, right? People are like scoff at that. And I'm thinking, no, as an alien and a stranger, my own theological moorings and my own biblical understanding often has me in this sort of trying to transcend and get over this thing and be able to see where it's both and. And in this particular case, I look at this and they say this had nothing to do with race. These were Hispanic cops and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, no, there's always a racial component in the sense that this moment is attached to a larger narrative. It's always attached to a larger narrative. And most of my white friends or just people, even some of my black friends who don't want to think this way, that is tied, this particular moment is tied to a larger narrative. Guess what? For the cops, pulling a dude over with a tinted window who rolls his window back up and is mouthing off and has the attitude enough to say no, okay? There's a history, there's a narrative of dudes like that being willing to shoot you as a cop. You know what I'm saying? And so both parties in this situation, again, I'm not trying to get into right or wrong. Like, I'm not even doing that right now. I'm just saying this moment is attached to larger histories, both of which need to be taken seriously in the moment if we're going to find wisdom. And we need to be able to say, dude, when somebody's standing there and there's three guys standing there with guns, that's not the time to let pride get going. Because when you do that, bad things are going to happen to you.
Pride on whose part?
In this case, just for this side of it, Tyreek's side.
Okay.
Don't bang on my window like that. Okay. Again, these dudes, like you should know enough not to get mouthy with three dudes with guns.
Okay.
This is a take, right? On the other hand, the escalation on the guys with authority, which has become so commonplace, not just become, like this has been going on for a long time. It's just not getting caught on video all the time, is a major problem. And it does have a racial component to it. It does have a racial history attached to it. That doesn't mean I'm trying to say these three guys are racist. It still has a racial component. And it has these other components of just being militaristic in their approach, not being able to de-escalate situations. How do we keep letting guys, just get pulled over for speeding and have it turn into this violent, aggressive, dragging somebody out of the car type situation? That is a problem. And it's attached to a larger history. So Christian, like my first step should not be to take sides in a moment like this, but it really should be able to step back if I have cross-cultural competency. Again, just talking about the racial part of this. Do I know enough of the history of black folks or just non-white Americans' overall experience? Doesn't mean it's happened to everyone. Doesn't mean it's happening all the time. Do I know enough about the history to know that this is attached to some really egregious stuff? And that every time a dude gets pulled over, a non-white person gets pulled over, it's attached to centuries of abuse with people that have authority over him. And this is what I'm saying, Ruslan. Most of the people I interact with, they don't have access to that history in their mind. They don't know it. They don't know it. It's just another moment, another isolated moment that's not attached to anything else. And I think that's a huge problem. When, this is going to sound kind of random too, but let me just go here for a second. When Ahmaud Arbery got shot, this is the one that I come to all the time. Horrible video, right? Just grievous, man, watching it, just terrible. In the morning, I had several black friends, a couple female friends that called and were crying. They were very upset. They were upset about what it meant for them. This was on the back of a bunch of those situations. So they were kind of on the back end of all the feelings that came with all that, seeing it, feeling it in their body. They were moved, bothered. So I'm having that conversation with them. I go to lunch a couple days later with a white friend of mine, and I bring it up. He doesn't even know it happened. He heard a little something about it, and I just showed the video a little bit. He's like, "Oh yeah, I heard about that. Like I heard he was stealing something in the house or something. Like that's it. Nothing, no emotion, nothing." This is what I do with that. Like, how can there be such a huge gap between the experience of my black female friends and this white dude who, again, is he racist? I'm not even trying to figure that out. I just think he's ethnically indifferent. He's been able to slide out from under having to pay attention to any of these racial trauma moments in our society across the entirety of his life. And he's in his 40s and still doesn't have to feel anything about it. I want to close that gap in the church. So I don't want to keep getting pulled out to all these extreme examples and what about this is and what about that. So it's like, yeah, I don't need to run to the end of the tracks with these extremes. I need you to feel something when there's a video, though, of any color man being shot. But especially, like, can you feel how this is attached to a bigger history? And
Absolutely.
the answer is no, Ruslan. Again, where I'm from, the answer is no, way too much. It may not be the same. Like, do you feel, let me ask you this. I wanted to ask you this anyway. So yes, it's very racially diverse out here. Do you think, though, that people have racial intelligence? And what I mean by that is, let's, again, just talk maybe white, black. Do you feel like the white people that live out here on the West Coast, they do know the history of black trauma in this culture? I don't mean just like they've heard of it, but like they've taken classes where you like have to really understand the situations that have actually happened. Like they've studied civil rights. They've studied these things. Like, is that in the school system out here in a way that you feel like people are getting educated about our racial history? Or is it just a little something here and there? And maybe you don't know that because you haven't been to school in a long time.
I haven't been to school in a long time. I will say, when I was in college, we had an amazing sociology department.
Where'd you go to college?
Went to Maricosta out here. So Maricosta is very, not to sidetrack because I want to come back to the Tyreek thing. Maricosta is a very interesting college in that there's a college in Oceanside. Oceanside is probably like the last blue collar town, but what they did strategically is they placed a campus in Rancho Santa Fe, the most affluent part of Southern California, arguably one of the most rich places to live on the West Coast.
Mixed or mostly white folks?
This is mostly white folks. Rancho Santa Fe is like the cream of the creme of it's really nice. So they planted a campus there, and because the property taxes from that campus are so high, the main campus in Oceanside is probably the best resource community college in the state. So my teachers at Maricosta were making like way more money than at Cal State San Marcos. The education at Maricosta was way better than at Cal State San Marcos because you could attract talent because your base level pay is so crazy. So Maricosta is very shrewd in what they planting that campus down. It's a little small micro campus, but those property taxes end up funding the school really well. So most folks who come out here and go to Maricosta actually get a really good education at a community level college. Having said that, yes, we had a great sociology program. I would say my brother, my sister, who all grew up in Del Mar, who all went to these sorts of schools, definitely are aware of the history that black folks have experienced here. Now, I can't speak on behalf of all white people, but most white people have black friends out here and are interacting with people. Now, again, how educated they are. But I think there is a consensus that, like, yeah, man, like, black folks have a pretty crappy history with police in America. And the macro idea that bad policing is bad and hurts everyone.
It plays everywhere.
It hurts people everywhere, including white people who are perhaps not as at risk of having bad encounters, but because they're a higher population, they're going to be more likely often, not per capita, but in the gross numbers, are going to be more likely to die at the hands of police. Right? That is true.
That's true.
So, yes, most folks, I think from my standpoint, are like, hey, man, like, cops can't do anything and get away with it, and we just act like it's cool. That's not right. Now, what happens is, and I just want to end this thought, is I don't understand, like, I can't comprehend how someone would be like, yeah, let the cops do their job. Like conservatives take the L in acknowledging that the justice system can be used to have a witch hunt against Trump with bad charges that weren't felonies until they made them felonies and all that.
Yeah.
And all that could be true.
Yeah.
But you don't think that that law enforcement could misbehave, and oftentimes this can negatively affect black people because oftentimes black people are more likely to come in contact with police because they tend to be, on the lower socioeconomic status. Like, you don't think that's a possibility. And so I think when this sort of stuff happens, I'm happy that it's starting to get charged more quickly.
Me too.
The situation with Sonia, I can't remember her last name.
Yeah.
That was right away. That dude got charged with murder right away, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But there was another situation in Florida that I'm sure you heard about where there was a cop. They had someone in custody over, I'm going to say, a domestic dispute.
Yep.
Dude's in the back of the police car. The cop is walking past. An acorn drops, hits the car, and he thinks he's under fire, grabs down, thinks he's shot. This is all on video. You guys go look at this. And is firing at the car where there's someone who is in handcuffs and shooting at the car while thinking he's hit. He was neither hit. There was no one shooting at him. It was literally an acorn that fell from a tree. He spazzes out. That gentleman should have been charged.
Yep.
That gentleman, he is a menace to society. If you are so spooked that an acorn...
Yep.
Everyone, white, black, rich, poor, should be like, hey, we got to get these guys off the street. Now, I say all that to say, while I think most cops are trying to do a good job, I think most of them are trying to do a good job, and I think most of them have a really hard job.
So do I.
And they're extremely probably overworked. A lot of overtime. It's a tough position to be in. So I think everyone should be able to agree that bad policing is bad, and we don't want bad police out here. So instead of trying to defund the police, which by the way, statistically, I don't know if you read Sho Baraka's book, but he proved statistically that black folks don't even want to defund the police, right? Statistically, we should be wanting to fund the police better to get better training, right? In California, you need more hours to become a hairdresser, to get licensed as a hairdresser and a hairstylist than you do to become a police officer.
Yeah.
There's something crazy about that. So this is what I'm saying. So I think we could all agree and be like, yes and amen. Better or we should,
including because we don't,
including my white brothers and sisters, should all be able to. Again, this is where the conservatives take a L. We should all be able to agree on that without jumping out the window and saying stuff like, "Well, all police officers have implicit bias against black people, and they're all racist, and it's not just a couple of bad apples. A couple of bad apples rottens the entire batch." Right? And again, that's the extreme people go to. So there's a tension that we live in, and then when we see a situation like Tyreek Hill, who's in Florida, who is a man of privilege, right? Big time. In a luxury car, multimillionaire, speeding. It said he went from 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds. That does have a racial component because I'm sure from his vantage point, there's perhaps a hostility towards police officers. Perhaps he understands some of that. From the police officer standpoint, they're like, yo, this dude is a menace. What is he doing? You got to chill, bro.
Yeah.
And then the escalation of force, right? And so it's like, yeah, I get the tension, but I think at the same time, we should all want good policing and we should all want to make their job easier.
Yep.
You as a reasonable citizen shouldn't be out here. I was at the Oceanside Harbor and these guys were about to get into a fight. Mexican guys, black guys, police pull up. They're trying to de-escalate the situation. These dudes, Samoan dude, black dude, just start talking crazy to these police officers.
Okay.
And I'm like, bro.
Yeah, don't do that.
These guys got firearms.
Yeah, don't do that.
I don't think you have firearms on you. This is going to end really badly. And I just see this anger. And so it literally goes from the police pulling up to hey, you guys can't park here. We heard there was a dispute. We're going to give you a ticket. And give me the effing ticket, man. You guys are, and just cussing out. And I'm like, man, this is a really interesting time where you have these sort of encounters. And so it's again, I'm just gonna take the position of we should we respect the authorities who are here to suppress evil and here to create order, while at the same time acknowledging that sometimes those who create order and have the sword have abused it.
Yeah.
And black people have been negatively impacted by that.
Which sounds very sane. And again, man, I don't know what's going on out here. I just know in my 56 years, I don't hear enough clear thinking out of that from my Christian brothers and sisters. I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
From my and I go to a pretty conservative church back home where I'm not even sure people would be able to get behind what I'm doing in this book, which really isn't taking any kind of a side. It's just bringing clarification. It's trying to bring clarification to a whole bunch of what I think has just been missing or distorted or being taken to extremes I don't even know if they'd have the patience to step into a book like this. And I think that's a problem. Like that is what I'm saying to my white brothers and sisters, or I've been trying to say. Slow down, stop being pulled to the extremes, recognize with humility that, again, this looks different for different people, but you probably haven't got a ton of exposure to non-white people. You haven't put much energy into non-white histories. Again, whatever that means. And again, listeners, be gracious to that idea. You just haven't done much. You haven't done much work in that space. So instead of immediately just grabbing on to whether it's your Fox News vibe or, you know, whoever it is your favorite pundit is that you listen to that just allows you to take this extreme position and dismiss the nuances, dismiss the human side of it. Like, we can't do that as Christians. That's why our reputation, look, there's all kinds of manipulation politically. I feel like this is a different conversation politically when it comes to race. There's all kinds of manipulation. There's all kinds of ideological warfare. Everybody's getting pushed to the extremes. Politicians are going to say whatever they need to say to be able to try to get the most amount of people behind them as they can, right? We all know how that works. They're playing a different game than what I think should be happening amongst Christian people in local communities of the body of Christ.
Amen.
And for far too long, man, we've looked and sounded too much. Again, we's a big word, but if the shoes fit, wear it, right? We've looked and sounded too much like political warfare and not enough like the prophets of the scriptures, honestly. Like we're being informed more by media outlets than we are the word of God. Just too much. And so what is the corrective to that is, I think, just to slow down and start by recognizing maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Right?
I think here's what I'm seeing, man, as I'm online. I'm seeing this I'm seeing this pushback against the pushback. I think a lot of what you described has been an overcorrection by the Kindys, by the D'Angelos.
In all directions, yeah.
And now what I'm seeing is I'm seeing white men, younger white men, who grew up looking up to black people.
Okay.
And were the avatar for the ally. But were told they're racist.
Interesting.
And now they're like, well, being racist is based, bro.
Okay.
And this, like, my buddy Redeem Zoomer put up a tweet and said, being actually racist is not based. And to see the vitriol, he's a Jewish Christian, not a Zionist in the least, by the way. Like not with the state of Israel, which is a whole nother can of worms. We don't have to get into that. Me and him disagree on that. And he puts this thing up like being racist isn't, being actually racist isn't based at all.
Yeah.
Right. And bro, the vitriol of the comment section on X of white dudes that were like, yeah, nah, man, this is how we feel because we were actually the avatar for the ally. We grew up looking up to black people, black artists, black having black friends. And then when everything went down, we were told we were racist. So we're gonna be racist. We're gonna be racist. For real. And let's stop acting like these differences don't exist. And again, what are we doing? What are we doing? We're doing the same thing. We're taking a hyper generalized view of white folks, black folks, this, that. And then we're using this broad stroke to hyper generalize people. And it's not helpful. So you're seeing it now with young white men who are like, I'm like, what? What are we doing?
Yeah, they're overreacting.
You know, they're
against the overreaction.
And so then what happens is, what do? They then take the fringe aspects of black culture that just so happens to be pervasive in media, right?
Yeah.
The sexy reds,
yeah.
The drill rap scene, the actual like poisonous, destructive stuff that everyone should be okay with saying, but perhaps because I'm white and I'm not of the culture, I can't critique drill music or whatever.
Okay.
Right? Okay, fine. But everyone should be able to say sexy red's poison. Yeah. This is poison, right? What Drake has promoted, poison.
Yep.
Future, poison. We should be able to say that. But what they do is they take that, they hold on to that, and perhaps a lack of rightful pushback against that from the BET award shows, from the culture. They take that and then they use that to then broad stroke paint all black people and think this is black culture. And it's like, no. This is not black culture. In the same way that the biker gangs who run drugs and guns does not make up white culture. Now, what percentage of black people commit crimes versus what? I don't have that data.
It's a subculture. It's a subset.
It's a subset of a subset, right? So what's happening in parts of Chicago, what's happening in Jacksonville, what's happening in these impoverished areas is not indicative of Black culture, as if Black culture is even a monolith. Because Caribbean Black folks are going to be different than folks from the South. Folks from the South are going to be different than folks from Los Angeles, right? And so I think that's what I'm saying, and that's why I'm like, oh man, this is getting bad, you know?
So keep going. Like, what do you think is how do you bring healing? Again, let's be church people. Mm-hmm. Let's be Christian people in these conversations. How do you bring healing to that? Or how do you, the overcorrection to the overcorrection?
Sure.
Let's say you have access to these dudes.
Yeah.
What are you saying to them?
Well, listen, I'll be honest with you. I don't know if they're even going to listen to me.
Okay.
Because I got a Black wife. So I'm already on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like straight up.
Okay.
I think what I would say to them, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is I would say, yeah, bro, some of this stuff's been hijacked. Like, you can't say punctuality is white supremacy.
Right.
You can't say work ethic is white supremacy.
Yeah.
What are you doing, folks on the left? You guys sound stupid.
Yeah.
Right? You can't try to deconstruct everything to the point where there shouldn't be private property rights.
Yeah.
And and you can't the means of production can't be owned by the people who are creating the thing.
Okay.
I know Christians that have went all the way on that end. Like, they're full-on Marxist communists.
And I don't get too much of that,
Yeah.
just so you know.
Oh, I get it. I get it. I got into an argument with
Okay.
someone because I said the Bible presupposes private property rights. They said, no, it doesn't. Private property rights came as a byproduct of capitalism. No, it doesn't. Go to Ethiopia, fam.
Okay.
Go to the oldest Christian nation. They have private property rights. The Bible presupposes property. No. Marx good, Bible bad, right? And so I've seen people fully deconvert to like, what are we even talking about, right?
Okay.
And so,
Yep.
so what I'm saying is, there are people who are rightfully upset because they've been told everything is racist.
Yes.
Punctuality is racist. Hard work ethic is racist. And I'm not making this up. This is actually
I
stuff
know.
that came out from the left.
I've seen some of that.
Right. And so then if everything is racist, then nothing's racist.
Right.
Then I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drop the N-word unironically on X
Yep.
and be edgy. And I go, wait a minute. So I think you have to acknowledge that, yes, some of this stuff from that's came out is poison. And some of this stuff to hyper-generalize white folks is bad. And I think if you can, in my opinion, if you could start there, then perhaps you can reel them back into reality and say, but let's not pretend that we don't have a racial history. Okay, fine. Perhaps that's not exclusive to America. Fair enough. Perhaps slavery is not exclusive to America. Okay, maybe chattel slavery is unique. But so I think, like, when I look at what's going on, I'm not looking at like injustice or bad things happening and looking at it from a modern Western lens and then looking back in history. I'm going like, the world in its natural state is chaotic.
Yes.
The world's bad. What's happened here is bad, but it's not that much different from the rest of history. Now, again, maybe chattel slavery is different, but this has always been killing and murder and taking people as slaves and doing really awful things to neighbors.
From the beginning. Yep.
So I think what happens is people on the left borrow from God even the objective of morality and like, how did you come to the conclusion that owning someone else is wrong if you're not borrowing from man is created in the image of God, right? So they're borrowing and then they're looking at it from a very modern Western lens and trying to look at the world history through rose-colored glasses instead of acknowledging that, bro, we shouldn't be wondering why there's chaos and injustice and evil. We should be looking at places where there's less chaos and injustice and evil and saying, what is it about this system that, okay, granted, America's not perfect, but people are literally dying to come here right now and would trade places with anyone, including people in the hood, to just be in here to have access to opportunity. Perhaps we've done some things right as well.
Yeah.
You know, perhaps there's something here.
Blowing the whole thing up is not the answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's the conclusion.
I know.
A lot of the stuff is like, we got to disrupt capitalism and destroy the system and burn it all down. And it's like, I don't think you guys really want that.
Yeah. You know what's happened with me, Ruslan, and just literally in the last 10 years, I was thinking about this as I was walking on the beach yesterday, and this is going to sound so cynical, and people crush me because they think I'm saying don't vote, don't be involved. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. But what's hit me in the freshest of ways is just how there is no secular solution to the brokenness of the world.
Nope.
Now, that's VBS, right? Mm-hmm. That's so low shelf Christianity, but I think it's actually easy, though, sometimes when you're in the world we're in, where it's a world of ideas, lots of debate, discussion, trying to figure things out, looking at secular politics and just trying to figure out what's the best way of organizing ourselves, which I'm all about that. Like, that's what my whole PhD was in. I love it. American culture studies. I love it. But I need to keep reminding myself that there is no answer under the sun apart from Jesus Christ. You know what I'm saying? And we haven't said that this whole time. Here's another thing that hasn't been said that I've been thinking about a lot. And it seems so obvious, but it needs to be said. It's a demonic stronghold, man. All good things that come from God, Satan, our spiritual enemy, is distorting. He comes to kill, steal, and destroy, right? That's what Jesus said. I've come that you might have life and might have it abundantly. But the spiritual enemy is trying to kill, steal, and destroy.
Amen.
And so one of the most fundamental good things that God has created is humans created in the imago Dei, created in the image of God, right?
Amen.
So it makes sense that throughout world history, you're going to see treacherous, heinous, unjust, oppressive, defacing of that because of spiritual realities. You know what I mean? And I think we probably don't even talk about that enough. Again, I don't know what you do or don't do. In my own circles, I don't think we talk about that enough. It is it's spiritual warfare.
Yes.
The enemy is not flesh and blood, right? It's just some of these just fundamental Christian teachings about the spiritual world.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on with these overcorrections, right? There's real fear, there's real ignorance, there's real getting my feelings hurt and my pride hurt. There's real threats to my security and my sense of who I am. Like all that stuff is going on both of these sides. And what I want to get better at, still, like I want to keep being able to do this better, is to slow myself down and refrain from judging people, because I got thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? I got thoughts. But refrain from judging what's coming out of their mouth and try to be a minister. Like, again, just basic language, right? Try to be a minister that listens well, that really tries to understand why they're coming from where they're coming from. Just even like you just did. Like you just gave a great apologetic for how these dudes overcorrect to the overcorrection and where it comes from. But listen to that and love them. And as God gives me opportunity to, again, if I have time to be with these people, try to diffuse the angst and the anger and whatnot, right? Get up underneath that by empathizing with it, which again, these are words that have fallen on hard times now, right? Like they're bad words.
Yeah.
Now I need to empathize with that and live in it with them a little bit. And bring them to Jesus, who does the healing, and help them see that them folks on the other side are not the enemy. They're struggling with their own issues in their own ways.
Amen.
So let's back off that a little bit, right?
Yes.
And let's get separated from all the political rhetoric that maybe you're getting too caught up in. Again, we're talking to Christians.
Sure.
Let's assume that.
Sure.
Okay? Because it's going to look different maybe with people outside that fold. And see if we can be agents of healing, man.
Amen.
You
I
know?
love that. I love that. Yeah, I think ultimately that's the North Star. You know what I mean? Is Jesus pointing people towards healing, pointing people towards reconciliation, without trying to create, a utopia of sorts. You know what I mean? That's like it's not going to be perfect on this side of eternity, unfortunately. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the church is a beautiful mosaic, and that's been more or less my experience. Like I came out of a very ethnic church background, Armenian Apostolic. Okay. And I brought my black friend to Armenian Apostolic Church, and it was awkward. It was weird. You know what I mean? And now you see, the Greek Orthodox, and there's some of that, and there you got the Catholics and a strong connection to Rome and Italy, and you got Ethiopian Orthodox, and you have these like separations. But when I came to faith, it was a multicultural church. My pastor was black. He was married to a white woman, and it was I would say probably predominantly 60% white, and then Mexican and black. It was a very multicultural church. So my introduction to faith, as I know it as a teenager, has always been that. And then I was at a church plant for 20 years. That similar. It was initially like punk rock church, and then as it grew and evolved, it became more and more diverse. Same thing. Pastor's white, wife is black. So these always have been my realities. Wow. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So,
even today, let me finish this out. Like even today, I go to Rhythm Church in Northside, amazing church. I don't know, 20% of the staff is black. You know what I mean? You got Hispanic folks. Like you have a multicultural, you got women on staff, right? So it's like these are the overflows of who we are. We're not trying to like, well, we need a black guy on staff. Like it just is. Like this is the overflow. And so when this is who you really are, you don't need to do the DEI thing. You don't need to do these things.
Right on.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just your reality is this.
Totally. And so, man, let me just say this. Like, I hope you realize, and I love your bio, and I have a similar bio, and I'm not going to lay it all out, but it's similar, okay, as far as what my exposure is, and just, I didn't even necessarily choose it. It was just happening to me along the way. And then suddenly I realized this is not everybody's experience. And I want to say, what you just described is not most people's experience of any race. Like, I feel, you want to talk about privileges. We haven't even talked about the idea of privilege yet, but I think it's a great privilege to have been brought up in that kind of exposure. Not then so that I can sit up on some kind of pedestal and judge everybody, but so that I can now try to steward what God has given me to try to be an agent of healing. You know what I'm saying? To be a voice of reason, if that's the right word, or just to be a good ambassador. And I won't even say this about what I was saying with Jesus being the answer and it's spiritual warfare. Like, I'm not talking about just slapping a verse on people either. Like, that's not the answer either. Like, to do hard listening and to really try to understand like somebody's story and to understand how it's connected to larger narratives. I just think is a super important piece of this whole thing. And not everybody's willing to put in that kind of work. So I don't know what to say about that, but on my watch, as much as it depends on me, I want to be that kind of a minister with people. Right?
No, I love that.
That's what I want to be.
I love that. I think, okay, so here's a little pushback though.
Go ahead.
So having said that, like, I'm totally with you, right? I think at one point though, I feel like in some of the authors you've quoted, and I saw this with your conversation with Neil. How do you say his last name? Shenvi.
Yeah.
Who's, I would say, at times, perhaps as maybe straw man, CRT. And in the conversation you guys had on Sean McDowell's channel, like, he kind of starts pulling up all these quotes from the people you positively quoted.
Yeah.
Right? And so even in the chapter I read here on your interaction with Marxism, right?
Yeah.
Like the tension sometimes is like, yes and amen to that. But then are we platforming and celebrating voices that are spewing out stuff that like is antithetical to some of these conversations?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to coddle a Marxist. Like, I come from real communism. I remember tubs of water for the week. I remember food rations.
Okay.
I don't play that game. Like, no, you are pushing poison. This is nonsense. And you can look at the fruit of it, or you can look at the demonic root of it. And I mean actual demonic. I'm not sure if you looked at Marx and the letters between him and his son and calling each other devils and demons, right? Like, so like, I don't coddle that. Like, I think it's like as bad as poison. It should be called out as poison. However, in some of your stuff, like, you have this, to your credit, you're more patient than I am with some of this stuff. You're very gentle. You know, because you're like, oh,
gentle.
Well, why is he a Marxist?
Bookmark that.
Fair enough. Hey,
that's the first time I've ever been called gentle.
You're better at it than I am, right? So like, yeah, in that conversation with Neil, he pulls a bunch of quotes out, and it was so you obviously you didn't endorse these quotes. You didn't use these quotes, but it was same authors that you quoted.
Yeah.
Also said some really wild stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so like, how do you reconcile that? Like, I'm like from my vantage point, it's very difficult for me to like stamp pull one source while at the same time, like, there's some problem. Like I would never quote a Kendi. I would never, and I'm not saying you did.
Ruslan,
you know what I mean?
Here's the thing, Ruslan. I would quote Kendi though. Okay.
To tear him up?
No. Listen, not necessarily. And again, I'm with you. Like, Kendi's not the answer. I think I think I name him. And this is not a book of naming people either. I'm not trying to do that in this book the way some people are doing.
Sure.
Here's how I'm wired though. I think we too quickly say that's crazy talk. What I do, and again, this may not be right. Like, people have different philosophies, different strategies. The way I do this is the only way I survived in my PhD program, which was 5 years of being submitted to hyper-Marxist, critical theory-driven teachers. It was wild progressivism. Okay, that's all I got for 5 years. And it wasn't deconstructing my faith. Like, I wasn't in it for that. I really was trying to learn. I always want to ask first, where did that quote come from? Like, what's the situation? This is actually what my problem is sometimes with Neil, who I respect in a lot of ways.
And you said this in that conversation with Dr. Sean McDowell. You did.
Yeah, that I feel like we're taking stuff out of its context. And I don't mean that you're deliberately twisting or distorting it.
You mean the macro story.
Yeah, I'm saying
sure.
they said this for a reason, and you don't seem to be trying to do justice to why they said it.
Sure.
I may not still agree with it, but even all these terms in here that you're just summarily dismissing, and we all know terms mean different things to different people.
Sure.
So we're just gonna like immediately demonize this because you don't like the whole, maybe their whole philosophy that you've heard. Because I want to be that kind of person I described, I want to be generous with this statement. Now, at the end of the day, I may say, look, no, this is BS. Like, I'm not going along with that. I've already said I'm perfectly willing to say that, but not until I've listened and tried to understand where that's coming from. And too often these dudes, man, again, this is part of the reason why I wrote the book, is because I watched and listened for years. Again, you've heard I come from this racially diverse background. I've been working with black folks, Hispanic folks, and whatnot across years. And again, I'm not trying to be anything. I'm just doing where God has put me. Then I go and do all this academic work. I did 2 theological degrees before that at a conservative seminary. Okay, we didn't say that, so that's kind of important. Like, that's my foundation. And then I went and did this radical progressive degree. What I found more often than not is, as people were saying crazy things, there was always a story behind it. As people are writing and you know, making these statements about whiteness or men or whatever, there's always a story behind why it is or how they got to this place. Now, that doesn't mean that I need to go along with their wild conclusions or their radical, you know, line erasing. I don't have to go along with that, but I better slow down long enough to find out what this human being's story is that got them to come to a place where they said what they said. And maybe they don't even mean by it what I think they meant by it. I mean, that just happens. That just happens in marriage, right? Every day, where it's like she's saying something and I think I understand it, only to come find out I didn't really understand it. And that's with somebody that loves me and we're in space together all the time. So why would I not have that same kind of, again, as a minister, I'm talking about being a Christian minister, missiologically driven. Why would my first step not be, help me understand, tell me more about that. Where's that coming from? Instead of, it's Marxist. It's this, it's that, right? And it's just, we're done. And all I'm going to do is fire back at you then. And I don't even really understand what I'm firing back at yet.
Yes, I think that's fair. I think there is a time and a place to call out bad ideas.
Absolutely.
Because we could.
Absolutely.
I mean, based on some of that, like, I can listen to the Satanist and his issues with religion and how it first starts as trolling, then it starts as black magic, and it's like, well, hey man, there are bad churches and there are churches that abuse and blah blah blah, and it's like, yeah, but where do we say no, it's just bad? Satanism is bad. Marxism is bad.
Somewhere.
You know what I mean?
Marxism is bad, but I will say this is what I did with this, and you were pushing on me about this earlier. Man, I'm not a proponent of Marxism.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask, why is it that tens of millions of people still today find themselves aligning with what they believe he taught? Again, whether he really meant this or not 200 years ago, 175 years ago, this is what they believe he's doing. They believe he's speaking truth to power. He's speaking on behalf of marginalized and oppressed peoples that are being taken advantage of, which are all over the place. He's giving people a theory of how to live under the sun without God, which is important, to keep your sanity if you're an atheist, right? Man, I forget what are some of the other things that I've said in there, but he critiques capitalism. He critiques capitalism. For better and worse, he at least gives people permission to say, oh, there is stuff in the capitalist framework that's not conducive to human flourishing. Even if at the end of the day you say this is still the best system we have, access to, yes, and it's still broken. Do we have space to be able to talk about that? So when I came away from my Marx studies was he's still crazy, demonic. Like, his voice was used to murder millions of people, right? Everything you just described, like, I hate that's what you were exposed to. And that's still going on. I don't give into that at all. But as somebody who lives in a world of ideas, can I at least see as a Christian that this dude is actually critiquing things that you should be critiquing too? You shouldn't be so snuggled up to the political right, or to conservatism, or to capitalism, or whatever the ism is that you've snuggled up next to that you can't see that there is oppression happening on your watch because you're not bringing the gospel to bear on people's lives and on different isms that are out there in society.
Sure. So, okay. So I think here, so you said why? Why is it permanent? And this is why. You said narrative. I think narrative can be circular. I think we can latch onto a narrative because partially our own experience, but because the narrative makes sense of how we see the world.
Yeah.
And the narrative becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I get that.
Right? So I have family members who latched on to the BLM/Marxism/disrupt the nuclear family. What are the conclusions? No private property rights. What do they ultimately want? Right?
Why did they do that? Do you know why they did that?
I think because you see something that I think we're so overexposed to with police brutality, which we all agree is bad.
Okay.
And that seeing that over and over is not healthy for any person. Seeing someone lose their life is not healthy for any person.
Right.
So you see something and you're actually consuming something that's traumatic and you don't even know it. So I think you see this over and over and you can't decipher that even though this is tragic and unjust, this doesn't happen all the time to everyone. I've heard stuff like this. This happens every day. No, it doesn't. This doesn't happen every day. Right?
Yeah.
There's 365 days in a year. There aren't 365 black people killed by police officers. That's not true, right? So I think you see that and you really start believing that this is connected to all police officers. I don't think your brain can decipher this. So that is a narrative you create. And then you go, well, what makes sense of this narrative? Oppressor, oppressed hierarchy.
Yeah.
Hierarchy's bad. Power's bad.
Yeah.
Capitalism's bad. I'm going to disrupt all of it. So now, here's the narrative that's played. So then the narrative becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, even though this family member of mine was actually on course to be a police officer, was actually on course to she was a cadet. She was doing the whole thing, right?
And she didn't do it?
She didn't do it. She backed out because of all of this.
Okay.
And the other day, this person comes in and they're ranting about immigration and how Trump's policies are better and how I can't believe and I'm like, you just got red pilled. Why? Because her story changed.
It did. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
She got immersed in an environment where she's seeing flourishing. She got immersed in an environment where there's love and there's Jesus and there's agape. She got in an environment where she's hearing about some of the craziness of catch and release and give them a ticket on this side of the border versus send them back and remain in Mexico. And now we're seeing the ramifications of this and the narrative changed.
Yeah.
So I think that's the dangerous part about these narratives is like, you could create a narrative about anything.
Yeah.
Satanists have a narrative, religion bad. New atheism had a narrative. Right? Yeah. And what happened? We need to make the country and the world as secular as possible and make it more secular. And you're not understanding that you're disrupting this very delicate habitat. It's like the guy who imported a bunch of bunnies into a part of the world that didn't have bunnies so he could go on hunting. And then all of a sudden the entire place is overran by bunnies. This is David Wood just gave this illustration.
Okay.
You're not understanding that you're tweaking very delicate habitats of these different hierarchies and social. And so what's happening in the UK now? What's happening? You got Richard Dawkins saying, I'm a cultural Christian because I like cathedrals and I like I like Christmas carols. And there's 10,000 mosques being open. And there's churches shutting down all over the UK. And they're rioting and having their 2020 moment because of this stuff. And so in your attempt to remove religion with the new atheism, is the world better 20 years later? Absolutely not.
No.
You got what you wanted, Richard Dawkins. So this is what I'm saying. So I'm saying, like, I get people's narratives. I get you've been hurt by a church. Some of it is legitimate. Some of it was you were really trying to serve. And by golly, the church hurt you. Other times, you know what? You were sleeping with your girlfriend and you wanted to keep doing that. And the church rebuked you. And now you have church trauma. Like, I get it. There's all kinds of narratives. There's real narratives. There's all of the narratives are real, even though the situations may not be as potent as they should be. Right.
Okay.
But these narratives can shape people's worldviews, and now these worldviews come with consequences.
All right. So what is again, I'm just going to throw it back to you again out of curiosity. How would you coach somebody about how they consume narratives? Because we're consuming narratives all the time. Mm-hmm. If we're paying, again, the assumption is we're paying attention to social media, we're watching news, whatever.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk to that crowd.
Yeah.
What is your advice then to how you navigate engaging different narratives? Like what you got a little mental list even of what you would encourage somebody to do when they're hit with narratives, especially if it's a narrative, two different sides. Mm-hmm. It's a narrative that already aligns with how they're thinking and
how they feel.
How they feel. Yeah. And there's a narrative out there that's the exact opposite of that, that they know that they're against for some reason. What are you saying to people?
I think one, sit with the best discussions on these narratives. Right, sit with the best of the best and hear people go at it over these narratives.
How do you know if you're getting that? What would?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think like the unborn conversation, right? Like I think there's quite a few pieces that have been created within the last couple years of hearing the best of the best really go deep for hours and hours on the unborn and abortion and pro-life, pro-choice conversation.
And sometimes you can tell that just by the posture of the people. Again, people also can be faking you. You're never 100% sure.
Sure.
But there is something about posture, about demeanor, about, like, do they seem like they themselves have encountered the best version of what's sitting across the table from them? So there's something to that. Okay,
yeah, so I think like Trent Horn versus Destiny on the issue of the unborn on the whatever podcast, one of the best conversations.
Okay.
And I go, okay, cool, man. Mr. Steph Curry, I think all women should have the right to kill their babies, even though you were almost aborted yourself and your mom actually came out as a pro-life advocate and you have wife and a kids and this doesn't, right? Like, okay, Mr. Steph, go sit with Trent Horn and listen to a 3-hour conversation and see if that worldview is actually more coherent and cohesive.
Good.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Ethical capitalism, ethical kingdom capitalism, right? Those with power should do the best to care for the least of these. I think where the conservatives take an L is we don't talk enough about private charity.
Okay.
It's not that conservatives are against helping poor people. We just don't think the government should do it.
Yeah,
I just don't. I think the government's highly inefficient.
Right
so
on.
My advocacy is Proverbs 25, the talents, the parable of the talents, into caring for the least of these. Paul, he who does not provide for the needs of his family, specifically his immediate family, is worse than a non-believer, is denied the faith. What is that? That's in the context of us now, and then the extension of caring for widows in a church that can't care for themselves, right? So I think we point to Scripture ultimately. So how do I engage with false narratives?
Yeah.
One, I say go listen to the best of the best conversations.
Like that. Yep.
Two, I could acknowledge someone's personal situation while not endorsing their conclusions.
All right.
I'll give you a real example. Me and my son will come back from New York a couple weeks ago. We do a Father's Day trip, and we got picked up in an Uber by a gentleman who clearly was not the person on the picture of the car.
Okay.
I get in the car. I got barely speak English. He's Russian. I can speak Russian. We're speaking Russian.
Right on.
He's not here legally.
Okay.
So I start getting a story. Story is the war broke out. I don't like Russia. I think Russia is a tyranny and it's all bad. And so I fled here legally, and I'm here now, and I'm working this Uber job, and I'm splitting the money with the guy that owns the car, and my family's behind. He has a daughter that's 3 years old.
Okay.
It breaks my heart.
Yep.
Right? I wish you wouldn't have done that ethically. Like, I think you shouldn't have came over illegally, and I wish we had better systems for people actually seeking asylum.
Yep.
But in the moment, I'm trying to help him figure out, how do we get your family over here? How do you apply? What is the next step? What is it? In the moment, I'm being as generous as I possibly can. Hey, this tip goes to this guy. Okay, let me run in the house and get some cash for you so I can give you as much money as I have on me to bless you. And right. So in a moment, you could be present with someone in the midst of their suffering and their trial, while saying on a macro, we have a serious issue with immigration in this country.
I disagree with how you got here.
Yeah, I disagree.
You don't literally have to say that to them, but you can still hold to that.
Yeah. Same thing. Guys that helped us moved in here. We hired a moving company. They were 12 hours late. One of the dudes came illegally from Russia. We're having a conversation.
Okay.
I'm trying to bless the dude while at the same time disagreeing with the sister. Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's a way to speak to the actual flaws and actual injustice in the system, while at the same time embracing someone's personal reality and what they feel, because you're not going to change their mind about the narrative and the story they've been telling themselves.
That's good. I love that, man. And you just triggered something in my head that I've been thinking about a lot too, and that is learning to live. And this may be just slightly off of what we were just talking about, so it's not a continuation of it. I love that advice. Learning to live with the contradictions and become comfortable with it. Again, that sounds so lower shelf, man, but I just don't think most of us are comfortable with contradiction. I think I can just say that. Like, the people that I encounter are not. They like the binary. They like the comfort of being on one side or another. And to be confronted with anything from the other side that muddies the water for them causes them to like get further away from it.
That's good.
Okay, because it's scary.
It's
scary when you got to change the narrative you've been telling yourself about yourself or about your people or about your background or whatever. That's a scary task. I was just in Philadelphia. Let me throw this out real quick because I just got confronted with this myself. Was just in Philadelphia for the first time I've ever been there. Went down to Independence Hall, did the kind of the tourist thing down there with Declaration of Independence, Constitution, everything. And have you ever been there before?
No.
Okay, so the way they've got it set up is right across from Constitution Hall, they got the Liberty Bell, okay? this artifact that represents, like there's a narrative attached to the Liberty Bell, right? That speaks of freedom and liberty and the democratic society and all this that's tied into it. There's a great like, what do you call it? Like when you're in a museum and there's all the history is there and a bunch of stuff written about all the people that have been set free by this bell and the courage that it gave people. Go down just a little bit further, like not 100 yards. And what they have there is they preserved the president's house from the first 10 years.
Okay. Which president?
Washington and Adams for the first 10 years, from 1790 to 1800. I didn't know any of this. 1790 to 1800, they lived there until Washington, D.C. got online, basically.
Interesting.
And then they all moved to D.C. But in those 10 years, they had slaves in that home who were serving them. There were like 9 or 10 slaves that lived right there. And so in the early 2000s, they were deciding whether or not they were actually going to put that as an exhibit. That's the word I'm looking for. Whether that was going to become part of the Liberty Bell exhibit. Okay. It's fascinating. I went and looked it all up because I wasn't paying attention to it at the time. Finally, in 2010, 2011, whoever decided we are going to let it be part of the exhibit. The argument against it was, well, that is an important piece of history, but that's for somewhere else. Like, you don't want to mess up the whole Liberty Bell vibe for people and the Independence Hall vibe, which is speaking of liberty and freedom. Like, let's celebrate that story. And of course, other people are saying, and whether these are radical progressives or whoever, I tend to agree with this. This is part of the story too, right here on this land. And even as you walk through this property from Independence Hall to Liberty Bell to the slaves' quarters, which aren't there anymore, but they got the basement dug out so you can just look down. It's very effectual, man, to be able to look down and just see this hole in the ground where they served and lived down in there. How do you live with both of these things being true at the same time? American exceptionalism, an experiment that's brought more good blessing to people. Like you said, people are still trying to get here. They'd rather live in the ghetto here than where they're at in other parts of the world. That's still true today, even in spite of ourselves. And yet at the very same time, there's slaves that are being held against their will in this situation, right? Right next to the Liberty Bell and everything. How do you make sense of that, right? It's very uncomfortable. The good-bad tension. Henry Cloud, I don't know if you're familiar with Henry Cloud Townsend. And Cloud talked about it. Like, I read this back in 1989 in a book that he wrote called When Your World Makes No Sense. And one of the chapters in there was about, to be able to get to mature adulthood, you got to be able to come to grips with the good-bad tension that lives inside of all of us. The good-bad realities about yourself, that you're capable of really, really amazing humanist things, right? And you're wretched, right? I'm wretched. I'm wretched. And so how do I come to grips with that? That's stage one. That's going on around you all day long too, man. Everybody that you meet is full of amazing great good and amazing evil. And I know we get in trouble with saying people are amazingly good in reform circles, but you know what I'm saying, man. They're capable of good and they're capable of evil. And those two live together inside of our parents. You know, as you try to make sense of maybe what's happening in our family of origin, like, how do I make sense of the fact that my dad did horrible things and my mom did horrible things, but they also did amazing things for me? Like, how do I make sense of that at his graveyard? That's a tension politically, racially. Again, what are we doing here? We're talking about race. Can I live with good and bad? Can I live with ambiguity? Can I live with nuance? Can I live with what was true for Ruslan's story might not be true for the next Armenian American I bump into, right? Can I live with that and patiently not have to get pulled into that comfortable place over here at some kind of binary extreme, but kind of live in the middle of that mess? All right, that's a lot of words.
That's good.
Thanks for letting me get all that out.
No, I love it. I think so. My thought just simply goes, these stories are important because they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. So the lens that we look at these things through, I just get very practical. Okay, how can we help the most amount of people with the good that we've been given, right? With the resources we've been given, time, talents, treasure, parable of the talents, to care for the least of these. Okay, right? To whom much is given, much is required. We are still the most prosperous nation. If you're here, if you've been born here, you are, genetically speaking,
rich.
You're rich, right? If you make $48,000 a year in America, you are in the world's top 2.3% of the world's wealth. If you make $98,000 a year, your household, that's the average in San Diego County, you're in the world's 1%.
Did not know that.
To whom much is given, much is required.
Okay.
So I think of the words of Jesus, and people want to read the story of the parable, the rich young ruler.
Okay.
Excuse me, that's not a parable, but it's the rich young ruler, and they're like, harder for an eye to enter through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to go
Enter the kingdom of God.
harder for a camel to enter the eye of a needle. And we read that, and we always think about someone a little bit more rich than we are.
Good. It's not me.
It's not me. Globally speaking, you're watching this on a smart device. You're watching this on a $1,000 phone with high-speed internet and an air-conditioned home with running water. Fam, you're the 1%.
Okay.
I'm the 1%.
Good.
I'm the rich young ruler.
Good.
So what does that mean? That means I cannot be owned by my possessions. I cannot be owned by my access, right? And to me, the greatest privilege I have is being an immigrant. Like, that's the best privilege I have.
Why do you say that?
Because I have perspective.
Okay.
I remember rations. I remember the Soviet Union. I remember my mom not having much of a say in what she could do for her job.
Okay.
I remember my dad not being able to live in a war-stricken part of the country and having to go and work in Moscow, and then developing a black market smuggling business of
Come on, dude.
bringing in contraband and becoming very wealthy, importing and smuggling contraband.
Okay.
And then my grandfather finding it, who was a staunch communist, and threatening to snitch on my dad and take him to, because my dad had like $20,000 in our freezer. Like, I have perspective.
Yep.
So when you have perspective, you're traveled, you've lived in other parts, you've spent other parts, you just go, man, we could do so much good. We could do so much good. And if you're upset with what's happening in this country, great. How about you do something about it?
Good.
How about you stop complaining about it, and you stop telling yourself these narratives, and you see whatever your heart is for whoever group, the single mother, people in the community, in the black community, people in the Hispanic community, white folk, like whatever your heart is, whoever you're broken for. What if we took inventory of the time, talent, and treasure that we have?
Good.
And we leverage that to skill stack, to handle the money we have now better, steward it better, and to be generous, right? And I when I think of that, I think to me, that's the solution.
Okay.
I don't think the government's going to fix any of this. I don't think Kamala Harris is going to pass reparations even if she wanted to.
Yep.
I don't think it's in the cards. I don't think any of this stuff is going to happen. And so all these things are making us more divided, while all along, the average person is living above their means, and in the most economically developed country in the world, still living on more than what they make, still in debt, still paycheck to paycheck. And does it have to be that way? I don't think it has to. And I don't think it's some oppressor complex from the outside that's making you be sloppy with money and not have a budget. I don't think it's someone else making you not be able to lean into an online course to develop skills, or to go be a plumber, or to go be, right? And so again, narrative. So here's a narrative.
Okay.
The guy whose wife runs my son's enrichment class that he just started was a stay-at-home dad struggling. His wife had to work full-time. They were barely getting by. He was living in LA. He went to a 12-week program at a Los Angeles community college.
Okay.
Came out, became a person that works on the electrical grids.
Okay.
Makes $250,000 a year.
Wow.
Is able to be this dude's from the hood.
Okay.
Is able to be a homeowner, is able to allow his wife to start this enrichment program, is able to give away a ridiculous amount of money, is able to change his family tree, right? To me, that's the solution. To me, it's like, take inventory of what you've been given in the perspective that like, you don't understand how good you really have it, and like, go and do the good that you see that's happening in society.
Yeah, good.
If that means starting a program to help people learn computers, help people learn coding, help people learn plumbing, help people. And so when I see that, I go, man, there's so much opportunity here. And there's so much opportunity to first take care of my household, then my extended family, then my local community, then my regional community, and the global community.
Right.
When you look at it that way, Marxism doesn't seem compelling. CRT doesn't seem compelling. I get it. People have, but that's the narrative to me. And this is where conservatives get it
I'm
wrong.
with you. Just so you hear me say this, in spite of, again, whatever people end up wanting to do with this book, I'm totally with you on this. I want to be able to pay attention to systems and structures. I want to pay attention to choices.
Yes.
Those two need to live together.
Yes.
It's not one or the other.
Yes.
I don't even know what the percentages are in any given situation, but it's always a little bit of both.
Sure.
So be able to play both of those cards. That's what I want people to do. Keep going.
Yeah. And I don't know how much of someone's worldview is affected by their environment. I don't know how much of their worldview is affected by the zip code they're in.
Right on.
I don't know. I can't sparse that out. But what I can do is say, hey, like, do you have hope?
Okay.
Do you have hope for the future? Because if you don't have hope, you don't have anything. If you don't think you could change your situation, then you're right, unfortunately. And so I hope to infuse hope. And in that, if that means I need to acknowledge systems, sure, it's not fair. It's messed up. The world's bad. Well, capitalism has downsides.
But even be more specific. Yes, that's a macro statement. But within my community, is there something happening that's making it more difficult for you to get ahead?
Sure.
And that can look different in different ways.
So let me give you a practical example.
And let me use my resources to help wherever I can to alleviate that. Keep going. What's the example?
Practical example. A good friend of mine, Jimmy Figueroa, he's running for city council in Oceanside. He was working in the Deep Valley in Oceanside. The Deep Valley in Oceanside. Remember I told you about Maricosta College, one of the best community colleges out here?
Yeah.
The Deep Valley is 10-minute drive from Maricosta College.
Okay.
So you got the most impoverished community within 10 minutes away of a drive to one of the best community colleges in the state.
It's interesting how often that happens.
Crazy.
Right? Yeah, okay.
There's no direct bus route.
Okay.
So to get to Maricosta College, even if you could get the grants, even if you can get the financial aid, you can get all your books covered, and you could even get a little bit of money, you got to take a bus from the Deep Valley in Oceanside all the way to the Oceanside Transit Center by the water, take a Sprinter and then another bus to get there. So you're talking about a 2-hour drive on a bus.
Just to get there.
Just to get to a 10-minute one-way shot. That if you got a car, you can be there in 10 minutes.
Okay.
So you got folks that are 2 hours there, 2 hours back to get an education. So Jimmy, in a very real way, which is, I think this is the coolest thing he's ever done, advocated for the city to create a direct bus route from the little sub Oceanside district right there in Deep Valley to Maricosta College, to give people the opportunity to go to college, to get educated, to get to school.
Love that.
That's a very practical thing that can be done.
Power, again, to use the language, he used his power in his sphere of influence, the social capital he had, his voice, whatever, right?
Yes.
And was that oppression? Was it racism? Like, let's not even do that.
Sure.
It's broke.
Yep.
There is a racial history somewhere in there that we could study. But again, to your point, Ruslan, it's like, okay, what are we going to do right now, man? Are you going to spend all your time trying to blow up the system? Or are you going to get a bus route right, for these people to get to the school?
Yeah.
I love that example.
Yeah. So when I see stuff like, and that's just one example, like I see so many people doing good work and helping people, helping others. All my wealthiest friends are all the most generous people I know.
Okay.
You know, everyone I know that's a millionaire and above, it gives away the most amount of money.
Interesting.
And so, like, I think there's just different narratives. You know, you think rich people are all greedy and bad, and it's like, they give the most percentage and gross.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who do you think funds all these charities? Who do you think does all the philanthropy?
Yeah.
Who do you think sends the missionaries?
Some rich people somewhere.
It's folks like the Green family that own Hobby Lobby that just bought Mariners Church a building and gave it to them in Oceanside because they had it. You know, like there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good stuff behind the scenes. They don't brag about it. They don't blast it online. But there's so much good happening. And so I want people to remember the good that's happening instead of looking at, you know, hey, man, it's bad. Yeah, it's bad.
Here's what else I hear you saying, though, that maybe is a subtext to all that, is that instead of investing all of our energy in just talking about abstract problems or, you know, ideology, which is a place for that. I mean, we just did it, you know, for a couple hours, right?
Sure.
And there is a place to talk at that level. But at the end of the day, as a Christian, at some point, these verses have to apply to me. I love what you did with that, right? That it's always so easy to read Jesus saying to care for the prisoner and the widow and the orphan, and that's just not me. That's not my ministry. I do sports ministry. I don't do prisoner ministry, right? And it's like, well, dude, no, like, is there any space at all in your world, either with your money or your time or something, to invest in that population? Jesus seemed to make a big deal about it. Like all through the Old Testament too, this has been hitting me a ton lately. God is regularly saying, stop with your worship until you go take care of the people that you've been not paying attention to. People that are being neglected, people that are being oppressed in all kinds of different ways. I mean, we do all this gymnastics of what kind of oppression was it? They're being whooped on under your watch. And he's speaking to the people that could prevent that from happening or could intercede in some kind of way. So go do that work, man. Again, you don't got to figure out what's going on in Washington. Vote. Pay attention. But you wake up every day living in a space that needs you to see it. Right?
Yeah. And I'm with you. I think the tension. I just did a panel with the AND campaign.
About
immigration.
Yeah.
And it says there's a real tension we live in when we look at the Old Testament, New Testament, there's a tension of what should our government be about between order and compassion.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, I am compassionate for the person that came over here illegally, and I will do what I can for them financially and in whatever way I can do, of connecting them with a lawyer, fill in the blank. However, at the same time, there has to be order, and there has to be laws, and there has to be borders.
Right on.
And so I think that real life tension that we live in should be fleshed out. And again, I go back to the macro of like, what is the role of government? Is the role of government to create a bunch of social programs? I don't know. I think the church should be doing that. I think the church should be caring for the least of these.
Yep.
Is the role of government to create a utopia? No, I don't see that in Scripture. What I see in Scripture is don't harm the alien.
Okay.
Don't harm the widow. Don't harm the orphan, and keep order and keep bound. Nehemiah 2. They're rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right on.
And so it's like there's that balance. And so it's like, as I think of that balance, I think politically speaking, that's where I don't see any precedent to try and create this utopia. I don't see a precedent for taking your stuff and saying, I know, I'm going to do something better with your stuff than you can do.
I don't trust them.
I don't trust them.
I appreciate you playing that card all the time. It's like, why would I believe that people in Washington,
come on,
they don't have that history of being trustworthy?
Yeah.
Here's what I wish would happen, Ruslan. I wish in our situation, Democrats and Republicans, again, this is just where we're at right now, I wish they would get together and figure that out in good faith.
Yeah.
You know, they could do that.
They could.
There's been seasons across our history where that's happened better than at other times. And right now we're in a lousy time for that. That's what discourages me just as an American, as a citizen. Again, step away from, being an alien and a stranger and living for another kingdom in this kingdom. I'm an American citizen, and I wish smart people would get together and figure out how to do those two things without letting all their own ego, their own fear, their own pride, their own ideology. Man, figure out how to keep it safe and be generous to people, right?
That's good.
Be human to people.
That's good.
We're not doing that very well right now.
That's good. And I would add, I think the conservatives take right now is that they don't clearly cast the vision of who should be caring for poor people, who should be generous, who should be charitable. They just talk about, hey, small government and less taxes. Which I'm like, yes and amen to that. I don't want the government involved. I do want a smaller government. But there is no vision of, hey, and those of us that have should help. And by the way, did you know that those who have do help more statistically?
Yeah, right on.
They don't cast the vision for that.
They literally could champion that.
They could champion that.
They could even champion churches and social groups, right? Like,
like if Trump came out and said, no, we care about poor people. We care about poor people. We just don't think the government should be doing it because the government's inefficient at doing anything. And we want to make it easier for charities and nonprofits to care for. Like, if that was the messaging that he put out there, I think it would change the tide. But the conservatives have not done a good job of articulating that. So then they just look like they're trying to hit whack-a-mole for the latest culture war issue without casting a vision of like, hey, within our framework, you're more likely to succeed. And within our framework, the more people to succeed, the more poor people can get helped.
It used to be called compassionate conservatism. It did. I think that was a Reagan thing.
Was it?
It was either Reagan or Bush or somewhere. Maybe somebody will throw out a comment or something about that. I don't know how far back that goes in my lifetime, but there was a stretch of time where that got talked about all the time. Now, of course, people will say that never was realized and it was trampled in different ways. But I still like the phrase, right? I like the idea. What does compassionate conservatism look like? Where we still maintain lines. We still build a wall. Like you said, again, I'm not saying that the literal wall needs to be built. I'm just saying, like, you put boundaries down, but there's ways to go out of your way to be compassionate, and make sure that people are treated with dignity and whatnot. Here's the thing: not everybody wants to do that.
Yeah,
not everybody wants to do that. Like, that sounds super utopian, even coming out of our mouths. Not even all Christians want to do that, Ruslan.
Yep.
Shame on us, but not all of them do.
Yeah.
So
that's unfortunate. And I think the cross, that's what the cross points us to, man, is like, hey, those of you guys that have, you're called to more, and not just more in the sense of like give everything away, but like called to more in that if you could steward and get more, get more to give more. You know what I mean?
Give more energy to thinking about how to steward your resources.
Amen.
I give energy to it.
Yeah.
You have a responsibility to that. I have a responsibility to that. Keep going. I cut you off.
No, that was it. Guys, we're going to go over to our Patreon exclusive section, talk a little bit more with Ed. I want to talk to him about his conversation with our friend Tim from the New Evangelicals, some of the stuff that was said there, and kind of get his take on how this stuff is impacting critical race theory to queer theory and some of the craziness that's been happening in society. So meet us over on Patreon. Conversation will be a little too spicy for YouTube. We'll see you over there, all right?
He's allowed to be in the girls' bathroom if he's claiming to be transgender. Legally, right now in Ohio, we can't do anything directly about that. Whether the Christians or the non-Christians involved, I don't think they cared all that much about this human being. They were just working their ideology out in front of everybody. Now, how do you protest? When do you protest? What's the spirit of the protest?
How do you not know and understand that like purity blockers are not a good idea? So these people are upset under Roman occupation over a 2% tax rate. You know what the effective tax rate is in California and New York if you make a lot of money?
Ruslan.